Winter had wrapped New York City in an unforgiving embrace where the wind cut like knives through the streets, sending swirls of snow spiraling under the flickering streetlights. Along the frozen banks of the East River, towering skyscrapers cast wavering golden reflections on the ice, fleeting, fragile, and easily swallowed by the relentless cold. The city was alive, but beneath its sparkling facade, a quiet, lonely chill crept through the cracks, settling into the bones of those who had nowhere to escape it. Amidst the relentless snowfall, a small cafe named Warm Haven stood resilient, its warm golden light spilling onto the snowy pavement. Nestled in a quiet alley away from the city's hurried pace, it wasn't an upscale establishment, but for those seeking refuge from the bitter cold, it felt like home. The rich scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of cinnamon pastries, wrapping the air in a comforting embrace. Behind the counter, Elena Carter, 25, hummed a soft Christmas tune. Her golden hair was loosely tied back, with a few stray strands falling effortlessly around her face. Under the cafe's soft glow, her emerald green eyes shimmered, holding a quiet warmth that contrasted the icy world outside. She had never known the warmth of a real home. Raised in an orphanage, she had spent years longing for a place where love wasn't something to be waited for, but something that simply existed, constant, unwavering. The cafe door swung open abruptly, ushering in a gust of frigid air that sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Snowflakes swirled before dissipating into the cafe's warmth. A tall figure stepped inside, his long black coat dusted with snow, his dark brown hair slightly disheveled from the wind. Nicholas Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, a name that carried weight in the corporate world, a man whose presence was as formidable as the empire he controlled. Elena's gaze lifted, locking onto his. His eyes, piercing, unreadable, like a storm trapped beneath frozen glass, sent a shiver down her spine. It was only a moment, fleeting and silent, yet something unspoken passed between them. Neither of them realized it yet, but that single glance had already set something in motion, something neither of them would be able to stop. Nicholas Whitmore stepped into Warm Haven, his sharp gaze barely registering the comforting scent of roasted coffee or the golden glow of the cafe's dim lighting. He slid onto a bar stool, peeling off his leather gloves, his fingers still stiff from the cold. He hadn't come here for a drink, nor was he seeking solace in the warmth of the cafe. He just needed a place to breathe, even if only for a moment, amidst the storm of chaos closing in around him. His company, Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, was on the verge of crisis. A newly developed tissue regeneration drug was under public scrutiny, bombarded with accusations of severe side effects, stock prices had plummeted, and the board of directors had lost their patience. Fix your public image, Nicholas. The world needs to see you as a stable, trustworthy man, someone with a family. Their ultimatum echoed relentlessly in his mind. Love had never held meaning for him. Marriage was a strategy, not a promise. But even he knew time was running out. He needed a wife, and he needed one now. Across the counter, Elena Carter wiped down a glass with practiced ease, still humming a cheery Christmas tune. She barely acknowledged the presence of the man who had just entered, or if she did, she certainly didn't seem to care. Elena wasn't part of the world of tailored suits and ruthless ambition. She belonged to warmth, to laughter, to late-night conversations over coffee, to dreams born from a lonely childhood. But then she turned, and their eyes met. Nicholas didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was the way her emerald green eyes gleamed with something wild and untamed, or maybe it was because she was everything he wasn't, an opposite, a contrast, a safe choice. A choice that wouldn't hurt. His voice was calm, unwavering. "Marry me." Elena blinked, momentarily convinced she had misheard him. Then a breathless laugh escaped her lips, sharp, disbelieving. "You can't be serious," she murmured, shaking her head. But when she met his eyes again, steady, unwavering, her amusement flickered. This wasn't a joke. He meant every word. Nicholas didn't laugh. "I'll fund scholarships for orphans." $750,000. Do we have a deal? The humor in her eyes flickered, fading into something more serious. She tilted her head, scrutinizing him as if trying to determine whether he was joking. But as she met his gaze, steady and unyielding, she realized the truth. He wasn't joking. The space between them felt different now, thicker, charged. Elena held his gaze for a long moment before a slow smile curved her lips, a smile that carried both defiance and a hint of reckless adventure. "All right, but I love too much. Can you handle that?" The wedding took place on a cold, gray afternoon at a grand, historic mansion nestled in the outskirts of New York. There were no fresh flowers adorning the altar, no soft melodies filling the air, only the watchful, emotionless gazes of the board of directors and the relentless flicker of camera flashes capturing every second of the transaction disguised as a ceremony. In a private room, Nicholas Whitmore stood before a tall mirror, adjusting his tie with the same calculated precision he applied to everything in his life. His features were sharp, his gray eyes void of emotion. This marriage was not about love. It was a strategy, a solution, a contract, nothing more. He had imagined this moment before, standing in front of a stranger, exchanging meaningless vows, sealing it all with a signature. But what he hadn't anticipated was the faint, almost imperceptible unease curling in his chest, a feeling he refused to acknowledge. The door creaked open. Elena Carter entered, draped in a simple white dress, far from the extravagant bridal gowns of high society. Her golden hair was loosely pulled back, soft curls framing her face, and in the dim winter light, her emerald green eyes glowed with an intensity that made everything else feel dull in comparison. She did not walk with the refined grace of a trained socialite. Instead, she nearly tripped on the long carpet leading to the altar. "Oh my God, I almost married the floor instead of you," she laughed, quickly righting herself, seemingly unfazed by the sharp glances thrown her way. Nicholas narrowed his eyes slightly. She was unlike anyone else. They stood face to face, under the scrutinizing gaze of the officiant and countless onlookers. When it was time to exchange rings, Elena picked up hers, turning it in her fingers before grinning mischievously. "If I drop this, does that mean I'm marrying the floor instead of you?" A few photographers froze mid-shot. The board members stiffened in disapproval, and Nicholas, he felt the corner of his mouth twitch slightly. He didn't smile, not fully, but for the first time since the ceremony had begun, something in his carefully controlled world wavered. A single crack in the ice, too small to be noticed, yet impossible to ignore. He reached for her hand, small, warm, and steady in his grasp. As he slid the ring onto her finger, a strange sensation rippled through him, a flicker of something beyond his control. The room fell silent as the officiant declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." There was no applause, no passionate kiss, just a signed contract binding them together. But what Nicholas failed to realize was that the moment his fingers brushed against hers, a tiny crack had formed in the ice he had so carefully built around himself. The sleek black Bentley glided through the snow-covered streets of New York, its tires whispering against the icy pavement. Inside, Elena Carter sat in silence, watching the city lights blur against the car's tinted windows. She should have felt out of place, lost in the world of billionaires and skyscrapers, but strangely, she wasn't afraid. Beside her, Nicholas Whitmore was equally silent, his storm-gray eyes unreadable. No words were exchanged. This wasn't a love story. This was a contract, a business transaction. When the car pulled up in front of a towering glass building, Nicholas stepped out without a glance back, knowing she would follow. His penthouse was here, luxurious, precise, and utterly devoid of life. As the door slid open, the apartment revealed itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River, minimalist decor, sleek furniture, everything was calculated, cold, emotionless. Nicholas shrugged off his coat and turned to her. He motioned toward a small doorway at the far end of the penthouse. "That's your room. Keep your distance." Elena paused, staring at him as if he had just said something ridiculous. Then, instead of walking away, she stepped closer. "Do I look like someone who keeps her distance?" Her voice was soft, but there was a challenge hidden beneath the words. Nicholas didn't respond, but when Elena reached out and touched him, just the lightest brush of her fingers against his wrist. He felt something unexpected. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't intimidated. She held his gaze, unwavering. Then, before he could react, she rose on her toes and kissed him. No hesitation, no second guessing. Nicholas should have pulled away. He should have reminded her that this was just a deal, but he didn't. For a moment he stood frozen, allowing her warmth to seep into him, allowing her lips to melt away the edges of the ice he had long since buried himself under. And then, as if something inside him snapped, he kissed her back. His hands found her waist, pulling her in. Their breaths tangled, heat rising between them in a way neither of them had anticipated. Something raw, something unspoken, surged through him, unraveling the iron grip he had on his control. For the first time in his life, Nicholas lost control. They tumbled onto the leather sofa in the vast living room. Outside, the snow continued to fall, the wind howling through the empty streets. But inside, between them, a fire had ignited. Elena smiled against his lips, her voice teasing, breathless. "Are you still sure about keeping your distance?" Nicholas didn't answer. Instead, he just held her tighter, as if she was the only thing tethering him to reality. And in that moment, he knew Elena Carter wasn't just a contract. She was breaking through every wall he had spent years constructing. And he wasn't sure if he wanted to stop her anymore. Morning light filtered through the penthouse windows, casting a soft glow over the once sterile space. But it was no longer lifeless. On the kitchen counter sat a tray of slightly burnt pastries, dusted in flour. The scent of hot cocoa lingered in the air. Twinkling fairy lights adorned the window, their golden glow reflecting against the snow outside. Elena Carter had turned this place into a home. Nicholas noticed it as he stepped out of his bedroom, his storm-gray eyes landing on her. She was standing by the counter, brushing flour off her dress, a small, triumphant grin on her face. She hadn't just brought warmth to his home, she had brought warmth to his life. But Nicholas also knew one thing: his world was not so easily changed. That afternoon, a letter arrived at his office. Thick parchment, crisp ink. Its message simple, yet chilling. "Leave Nicholas, or everything you love will burn." No signature, but Nicholas didn't need one. He knew exactly who had sent it. Victor Langley, a longtime rival. A man who had once lost a billion-dollar deal to Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. He never forgot, and he never forgave. Nicholas clenched the letter in his fist, his expression darkening. No one touches her, no one. He immediately ordered his security team to track down the sender. But he didn't tell Elena, and that was his mistake. Elena found the letter later that evening, tucked into the pocket of his coat. Her hands trembled as she read it, her breath hitching. A bitter taste filled her mouth. She knew Nicholas would fight for her. He would never let Victor Langley's threats dictate his life. But what if she was the one who brought destruction upon him? What if her presence became his greatest weakness? That night, she watched Nicholas from across the room, his expression tense, his mind elsewhere. He hadn't told her about the letter. He was trying to protect her. But maybe she needed to protect him, too. That night, at the Whitmore Pharmaceuticals charity gala, Elena stood among Manhattan's elite, a champagne flute resting in her hand. The women surrounding her didn't look at her with admiration. They looked at her like an outsider. She's just a coffee girl. Guess Nicholas got tired of high-class women. Someone like her doesn't belong in his world. Elena smiled, a smile Nicholas would never see. That night, when Nicholas returned to the penthouse, everything was the same. Except for one thing. Elena was gone. A single letter sat neatly on the sofa. "Nicholas, I don't belong in your world. I won't be your weakness. Don't come looking for me." Outside, the snowfall thickened, blanketing the city in a cold, unrelenting silence. Nicholas stood frozen, disbelief and fury colliding in his chest. His fingers clenched the letter so tightly it nearly tore. A sharp, searing pain spread through his ribs, hot, suffocating, unbearable. He had never felt it before, and he had no idea how to make it stop. She was gone. and he had no idea what to do with the emptiness she left behind. Nicholas Whitmore stood frozen, his storm-gray eyes locked onto the letter on the table. The world around him blurred, leaving only the words Elena had written, each sentence a blade cutting through his chest. She was gone. Suddenly, he snatched the letter and threw it aside, rage boiling inside him. No. His voice was hoarse, raw, his hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. In a fit of uncontrollable emotion, he slammed his fist against the glass window. The sharp crack of shattering glass echoed through the penthouse, shards slicing into his skin, blood dripping onto the pristine floor. But he didn't care. The pain inside him was far worse. Without a second thought, he stormed out into the snowstorm, icy winds biting into his skin. His breath came out in ragged gasps, but he didn't stop. He had to find her. He knew Elena. She wouldn't go far. She always sought solace in quiet places when she needed to think. And there was only one place in this city that gave her that peace: Brooklyn Bridge. Nicholas ran, his blood staining the snow, his body numb from both the cold and the fear clawing at his chest. And then he saw her, a lone figure standing at the bridge, arms wrapped around herself, trembling against the wind. His heart clenched. "Elena!" he called out, his voice breaking through the storm. She turned, her emerald green eyes filled with heartbreak, yet flickering with something fragile: hope. Nicholas strode forward and dropped to his knees before her, his hands shaking, his breathing uneven. "Without you, I'm nothing." His voice was rough with desperation. "Don't put out my fire." Elena burst into tears, her sobs mixing with the howling wind, and then, without hesitation, she threw herself into his arms, clutching onto him as if letting go meant losing him forever. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was scared, but I love you too much to leave you." Nicholas held her tightly, his warmth wrapping around her, melting away every last trace of cold. They had found their way back to each other, not through a contract, but through an unbreakable promise. Years later, together they built Elena's Haven, a sanctuary for orphan children, a place where no child would ever have to wait for love. And in time, they had 2 children of their own, Ethan and Lily, a perfect blend of Nicholas' strength and Elena's warmth. 40 years later, in a small countryside home, surrounded by fields of wildflowers, Nicholas and Elena sat side by side on a wooden swing, their grandchildren gathered around them. "Tell us your love story, Grandpa," a blonde-haired girl chirped. Nicholas chuckled, his gaze still as gentle as it was all those years ago. "Your grandmother melted me in the snow." Elena laughed, resting her head against his shoulder. "And your grandfather ran across the whole city for me, bloodied hands and all." The children giggled, but in their wide-eyed expressions, there was admiration for a love that had withstood every storm. Outside, snowflakes danced in the air, but inside their home, love burned bright, just as it had from the very beginning. And Nicholas knew Elena was the fire that had melted him, reshaped him, and would burn within him for the rest of his days.